Hi, psychology students. Mr. Roloff here, putting together a video for what will be our next and actually final chapter here for the class, which is going to be called Stress and Health. I know, at least going back to the beginning of the year, this is one of the topics that you wanted to get into, and this is how we'll wrap things up. I know I said in previous videos or plans as well that we're going to be trying to do this particular chapter and psychological disorders, and just based on the time that's left, I'd rather at least do one complete chapter the right way as best as I can, rather than split up a couple chapters and maybe not really get the full picture on a particular topic. So, um, again, I would have loved to be able to get into the psychological disorders chapter. Um, I know if we were in the classroom setting, we would have been able to do that, been able to go over the various categories, um, get into more depth on that particular front. Um, and then getting into what I've done in years past, pretty much every year since I've had this class for the end of the year, is do a final project where you would be working either by yourself or with a partner to do research on a psychological disorder of your choosing, where it'd be both an informational project, at least of getting into what the psychological disorder is, how it impacts people, and getting into just a PSA, where again, it gets into depth of how a particular psychological disorder impacts a person's life, their day to day. So, again, I've seen in the years past pretty powerful presentations on that particular front, especially people that are open enough to be able to share even something that they might be dealing with, and maybe somebody that they know is dealing with that they maybe don't talk about that much. That again makes it a pretty powerful presentation to build perspective, which is a word I used a lot this semester and pretty much I use all the time. Um, so that's how I would have liked to have done things. If we were in the classroom, we would have been able to cover all these different topics, and maybe even a couple more if we were in the classroom, but it just wasn't meant to be, obviously. So that's kind of my explanation of things. So I know for when you see this video, which will be for the week of May 11th here coming up, um, that you're going to be wrapping up everything with the adolescent unit, at least with what I focused on there, and with the collage, or at least the project on your identity. And then we'll be transitioning from that to getting into stress and health. I know this is one of the topics that, maybe I said this already, but one of the topics that you chose, at least, is one you would like to cover throughout this year, along with some of the other topics. We got into, especially everything with the brain. Forgot kind of the other topics that were standing out as well, but wanted to at least close up on one that was a popular choice, at least in terms of what chapters you wanted to try to cover here. So, without further ado, we'll get into this first section for this chapter on stress and health. So the main idea here is going to be that many different situations and events can produce both good and bad stress, and some personality types may even create their own stress as well. So the things we'll be getting into, or I'll be getting into here today, are what are the two different kinds of stress? What are the main sources of stress? Why does conflict cause stress? And how does a personality type affect stress here as well? So, in physics, I guess I'll back up before I get too far there. In physics, stress is defined as pressure or a force. But in psychology, stress is the arousal of one's mind and body in response to demands made upon them. And again, psychological stress can also crush and press people in their own way. People may feel crushed by the burden of making an important decision, which some of you might be dealing with, especially here in the days and weeks to come, or already have been maybe in the last couple of months. Or they may feel pressured by or pressed by a lack of time in which to complete a major task. So those are things that we have to keep in mind here as well. Stress forces an organism to adapt, to cope, and to adjust. In a way, it's kind of getting into things like the fight or flight response that we have, at least in psychology, what we've talked about before. And the word stress itself is used differently by different psychologists. Some psychologists describe stress as an event that causes tension. Others describe stress as a person's response to a disturbing event. And still others define stress as a person's perception of an event. And not all stress, though, in the big thing, at least big picture, isn't always going to be bad. Stress can increase sharpness and motivation and can keep people alert and involved. Again, there's a variety of different kind of those pressures that we face that, again, it's the whole notion that you hear that expression that some people thrive under it. Um, and again, it might not be something that applies for everybody, but for certain types of people, a certain type of pressure or stress is where they step up. That whether it's a test, whether it's a big moment in a basketball game, a football game, whatever the case may be, that regardless of what might seem like on the outside a very stressful event and pressure filled moment, you have people that can rise up to the challenge and think really kind of nothing of it. So, again, in that case, you get the best out of people. That your back's against the wall. You hear that expression a lot too. That your back's against the wall. You feel that all right, you got nothing to lose. You got to fight back, and for some people, that's their opportunity to shine. So again, while we think about stress typically in a way that it's negative, wears a person down, there is that stress or pressure, more specifically, that allows for people to rise up to the challenge that comes to them. Um, and this positive stress is called eustress. That's the positive stress. So again, it increases sharpness and motivation and can keep people alert and involved. That again, something that I would think of even kind of just right now. Maybe it's not a positive, um, but if you're trying to attain a certain grade, that kind of pressure that you have for yourself to get to that point, if it's a goal that you really wanted to achieve, will keep you sharp and focused on the task at hand and what you need to do. That regardless of what else is going on around you right now, you can still do the work and put in the time to get that goal accomplished. And again, eustress is a sign that a person is taking on a challenge to try to reach a goal. I guess I just said that, but um, again, that's something that we have throughout our life. Those are things that at least you've done, I'm sure, plenty of times up until this point, but something again that you're going to continue to do or have moving forward. That if there's something that you really want, you're passionate for, you're desired for, you'll have this kind of stress in your life. But again, it's seen more on the positive stress. Negative one, stress is called distress. Pretty straightforward there. And that's linked to intense pressure or anxiety that can have severe psychological and physical effects. When stress becomes too severe or prolonged in one's life, it can strain a person's ability to adjust to a variety of situations. And negative stress itself can dampen people's moods, impair their ability to experience pleasure, and even harm the body. In high school and college, students often experience stress that is related to family problems, relationships, pressures at school, loneliness, and general nervousness. So, again, we did just wrap up at least the adolescent unit, and we got into at least the notion of stress itself, all the things that you have to face in this time in your life. That, again, you're trying to figure out your identity, you're trying to please people because that's kind of just a human nature type thing to do, trying to at least please your parents, your family, your friends, your people at your school, your coaches, your coworkers, your boss. There's a lot of people that I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Not subscribe to, something like that. But there's a lot of people that I guess you answer to. I think that's what I'm looking for. Um, so it's something that, especially in your age, at your time, some may be able to cope with all those stressors that they found good and healthy ways. You can talk about the support of having good family structure, amongst other things, physical activity, meditation, those kind of things that you might be able to do to kind of cope, not kind of, hopefully cope and work through or deal with the stress that you have in a healthy and productive way. But there's plenty of people that are in that age, and I would still say even as adults, that don't have those positive ways to cope with stress. And it kind of gets to a point where, as we'll talk about probably in a bit, the simple fact that it can lead to outbursts, it can lead to some pretty negative consequences mentally, physically, socially, and emotionally. That if you don't have those good ways to be able to deal with distress, you're going to probably see a lot of people pent up that aggression, that emotion, those feelings, and it's going to kind of take really just a moment for things to go haywire. So those are things that, at least that we see here. And again, this is something that, especially what you see in college, I know I saw it even just in my experience there as well with people that I knew, is that the stress that you face there, the new responsibilities and challenges that you face in college at the next level, even if it's just, even if not, even if it's just, even if you get in the military or in the workforce, that you're going to be more than likely on your own for the very first time, generally speaking, that you're going to have to make a lot of decisions on your own. That there's going to be people like your parents that you can rely on for advice, but in the end, you have to make the call. And again, that can lead to a lot of new stress that you haven't had to deal with before. Um, but again, the point I was getting at is that stress is one of the main reasons that college students seek help at counseling centers. And again, it's something that I think I got into even back at the beginning of the school year. I think got into this particular topic in some way, shape, or form. Um, might have been when Mr. Preston was here, at least when we talk about the different types of psychology. But the simple fact that, especially on college campuses, but hopefully in school districts like ours across the country, you start to see more money, resources, time, energy, and effort getting focused in on having these counseling centers or at least supports systems in place. Obviously, I know something that we've started this year and gotten into is Sources of Strength, um, that deals at least with these kind of pressures and just getting into the effects that all of what you face, especially at this time in your life, has on a variety of different topics. So those are things to keep in mind there. So those are a couple of different types of stress. We'll get into the different sources of stress here. The event or situation that produces stress is called a stressor. However, what is a stressor for one person may not be a stressor for another. So again, it gets into that notion that I've talked about a lot with perspective. That again, something that you might feel is a stressor for yourself, and maybe for a lot of others might not be the case. But again, it's important enough to be able to respect your feelings and what you're experiencing, and again, finding healthy and healthy ways to cope, but to also understand other people's perspective as well. That again, something that might not be a stress-filled situation for you might be for somebody else, and so you might be nonchalant and again about a certain situation where somebody else might not be. They might have not have that confidence, whatever the case may be, to work through the situation. And again, it's important to at least respect that difference. I guess an example to build off of that is that two people might react to a long bus trip quite differently. So you might have had to do that at least like going to Washington, D.C. back in middle school. For one, it might be a relaxing vacation. And while for another person, it could be a stressful and unpleasant time. So again, it might be things that you're getting further and further away from home. Maybe the person hasn't gone on a trip that far away from home before. Maybe they're worried about riding in a bus, getting kind of car sick, I guess, or bus sick if that's a thing. Um, but again, it's important to be able to understand that perspective and work with yourself and with somebody else, um, especially if you're going through those situations. However, though, some stressors are going to be common to most people. So, for example, a loud, continuous drilling noise outside one's window would be pretty irritating to just about anyone. It's the whole notion that, yeah, some people find ways to either counter that loud noise or cope with it, but generally speaking, there's not too many people that you're going to see that finds that kind of noise um, pleasant in any way, shape, or form. But when stressors like that and stresses pile up on each other, we can reach a point where we have difficulty coping. Kind of as I alluded to, that all the different things that you have to answer to in your life, if you don't have good ways to be able to cope with those pressures um, and stressors and stresses, um, you get to a point where it piles, it weighs you down. And to avoid reaching that point, it's important to recognize some of the causes of the stress as well. So, if you go and see a counselor or get any kind of support on that particular front, that's going to be honestly one of the first things that you get into. That maybe you haven't had the time to be able to reflect on what the stress may be, what might be causing it, or heck, it might be just simply that what you think is a stressor or a source of stress uh, maybe isn't the thing that is there. There's kind of something lurking more in the back of your mind and your subconscious kind of a thing. That if you don't take those opportunities to reflect, you really can't go forward. So I know that's kind of a cliche quote that you get used a lot, but you kind of have to, at times in your life, including dealing with things like the stress, you have to think back about what you've experienced, learn from those experiences, and then move forward and hopefully be a better person for it in the long run. Um, One of the most common sources of stress is frustration. I would say that's definitely the truth for pretty much, I think, anyone and all of us at this point in time in the world that we live in at this moment. Um, Again, that's simply just being blocked from attaining a goal, such as being late to an appointment or lacking money, or obviously in this particular case, especially for seniors anyway, but really for seniors, obviously graduating high school, being able to have that ceremony to kind of have a final and like um, a meaningful kind of period to the end of the sentence that was your high school career, and obviously even just for the juniors in here as well and the seniors too, not being able to potentially participate in spring activities that you're looking for, that's done and gone. And again, can be very frustrating that you feel that again weren't able to end things on a good term like you would have wanted to, that you didn't realize, especially for a senior maybe, that your junior year spring sport or activity that you did that season was going to be the last one, that you didn't maybe get to appreciate it as much as you would have liked to. um, that's something that can be part of that here as well. um, Sometimes life seems full of frustrations, as we've seen here, especially in this time. And although many frustrations are minor, the more serious ones can be extremely stressful. For an example on that front, working on weeks on end on an important project only to lose it and have to create it all over again, that would be something that would be a major frustration. So I know I've had that in my own time, whether it's working on a paper or a project or really honestly anything else. Um, and you make progress and either something doesn't save or the computer crashes. I know that happened with my personal laptop that I had to do a lot of work and pay money, at least at the computer store in Green Bay, to get that stuff all back in my laptop. So um, that would be at least one source of stress is frustration, which again is one of the more common forms or sources. Another category would be our daily hassles. So that includes everyday frustrations, whether it's on the household front, health related time and pressure front, your own inner concerns, environmental, financial, work, future security type fronts. It's all those kind of things. Um, Again, this type of stress comes in a variety of different forms. Um, and when these daily hassles become severe or frequent enough, they can threaten a person's well being. Psychologist Richard Lazarus and his colleagues found that there are 8 main types of hassles, as I have all listed right there. The household hassles, which would include preparing meals, cleaning and shopping, your health house hassles, which would include illnesses you're facing, anxiety about medical or dental treatment, which again would be obviously pretty dang common, and especially in this day and age at this time. Um, and the side effects of medication, that would be another one, at least there. There's the time pressure hassles, which include the feeling that there are too many things to do, too many responsibilities that you have, and not enough time to do what needs to be done, which again, probably is some of the frustration that some of you might be facing or feeling maybe right now, obviously with online learning. Um, there's that. There's the inner concern hassles, which includes feelings of low self esteem and loneliness. There's the environmental hassles, which include noise, crowding, pollution, traffic, and crime. So it's kind of really obviously on that particular front about the world around you. So yes, it can definitely be dealing with the whole notion of climate change and the effects of that for sure. But this also includes kind of just the factors that are in your world around you that you don't really have control over, generally speaking. Um, so there's that. You have the financial hassles, which include concerns about paying current bills, repaying loans, and saving for the future, which, yeah, that's a definite for millions of people in the United States and across the world, if we're getting into billions of people, at least on that particular front. There's the work hassles, including unhappiness with one's job and problems with coworkers, that piles up. And then there's the future security hassles, which includes concerns about job security down the line. That are you doing good enough to be able to hold on to a job? Is a certain industry or business going to be around for the long term that you can have a job for a while, or are they going to start making cuts and then your job is going to be lost and you have to try to pick up the pieces? That would be something that would fall into that particular category with the future security hassles. It also include taxes, investments, and retirement income. Again, especially right now with the stock market as it is, there's plenty of people that are feeling that kind of stress right now at this particular moment in time, especially over the last 2 months. And again, these all, at least on this particular front, can lead to feelings of tension, nervousness, worry, being worried, and sadness. Again, there's a good amount of things that are in this particular daily hassle situation that are, generally speaking, things that are out of your control. Um, and yes, you can definitely make enough cases and arguments, at least for each of these 8 categories, that there are at least certain things that you can control. But just the different examples that I gave you here, there's a lot of things that, again, are really out of your hands that you alone can't change. You can try to control your feelings and emotions as best you can about these things. But again, a lot of the things that are in this category are things that are out of your hands. And then you have the life changes category here. And that includes major events like moving, so moving away from home. Again, that might be a possibility for some of you, at least here, that are graduating, and even juniors potentially that you're thinking about college next year. That depending on where you're going to for a university, you might be going a good distance away from home and being home for an extended period away for the very first time in your life. Same thing could be, again, if you're joining the workforce or getting in the military, obviously, and getting deployed or at least sent to different um, bases across the world um, as well. So those are at least some of the examples there. Um, what else is going to say? Life changes themselves, I'll just dive into that, differ from daily hassles in 2 very important ways, because it might seem like life changes and daily hassles can be kind of intertwined and connected pretty easily. The 2 different ways that life changes are different from daily hassles is that, one, many life changes are positive and desirable. Generally speaking, I know at least that 2 out of the 3 examples are not exactly the case. Um, and the second thing would be that life changes tend to happen less often. So it's not something that is facing you on a daily basis, or the daily hassles that's implied in the name. That these are things that you experience on a day-to-day basis, regardless of how you're feeling, regardless of what's going on. These are things that you have to work with um, every day. Where these life changes here, you're not moving usually very often. Hopefully not. Same thing goes for serious illnesses that either you or someone in your family or close inner circle, that you're not dealing with that on a day-to-day basis, or at least like every day of your life kind of a thing. That there unfortunately will be those moments where you're dealing with a serious illness potentially, or somebody else that you know, and that can definitely weigh a person down for an extended period of time. But it's something that, again, you're hopefully not going to be experiencing for every day for the entirety of your life. And the same thing for death too, is that hopefully you're not dealing with that for an extended period of time. And again, it's losing someone is challenging. And again, those are feelings and emotions that don't just magically go away. That even with time um, and losing somebody, um, it's not just going to be magically better for everybody or anyone, really. Honestly, you just have to find different ways to cope, which we'll get into, I think, later on here. Building off of this particular topic, researchers Thomas Holmes and Richard Ray attempted to rank various life changes according to the amount of stress each produced. The researchers asked people to rate each of the life changes on a scale of 1 to 100 in terms of how much stress that they experienced and how much adjustments they needed to make. The two then used the figures to create the social readjustment rating scale. And even life changes that are enjoyable can produce stress because they require a certain amount of adjustment. And according to the two researchers that I got into here, too many life changes, even good ones, where you get moved to a new place, get a new job, meet your significant other potentially, like all those things. If that happens kind of all in a row, which would be seeming like a very good thing, um, can cause stress that leads to high blood pressure and other health problems down the line. But again, it ties back into what I talked about at the earlier point of the year that, as human beings, we like routine. We like things to kind of stay as they are. And that even when there are a lot of good things that are happening and good changes, it can still be a bit overwhelming. That you have that euphoria and happiness and thinking that, again, this is the best time of your life. But then you start to kind of add up all the different things that you have to maybe start thinking about that you didn't have to necessarily plan for before. So that's what that's getting at here. Daily hassles and life changes, especially unpleasant ones, influence the quality of a person's life. They can cause a person to worry excessively and can dampen their spirits. Stressors can also lead to health problems that range from minor athletic injuries to serious illness down the line. And Holmes and Ray found that people who experienced many life changes within a year's time were much more likely to develop medical problems than those who did not. So I can think of at least a couple instances in my life of people that I know that experienced some pretty stressful things, whether it was related to work or their personal life, that subsequently down the road dealt with some pretty severe health issues that, again, some people could say brush off and say that the stress generally speaking isn't going to potentially get somebody to have cancer or anything of that nature even. But um, with what at least I know for general experience, from what I know from the couple experiences that I was alluding to, and one in particular, I can almost say that there could be a general connection of just what one particular stressor brought a time ago. So that's something that, again, you may have seen with somebody in your life potentially that went through a serious health issue, that there may have been something that happened before that, that they may have lost a spouse, family member unexpectedly, um, may have been fired from a job or let go, and are having a hard time trying to be able to kind of get get um, moving forward. That, again, that piles up. It can lead to serious health issues down the line. So it's the whole notion that, again, you know, don't let anyone tell you otherwise, that there are, that, oh, stress doesn't cause health issues. There's plenty of research that's out there that shows that in the long run. Again, the goal is to try to be able to find some kind of balance if that's even possible, especially it seems like in this day and age. Um, but it's something that, again, as we get further along, at least in our own research in psychology on this topic, um, we're starting to realize more and more in this day and age, at least, about the importance of having the support there to deal with stress in a positive and healthy way. Um, and again, this is kind of more of a side tangent. I know a lot of people with one of the more recent, at least, attendance questions alluded to, happiness as being kind of the main thing to shoot for. And while, yeah, that's a great thing to be able to have and try to attain, trying to do that on a daily basis can be pretty overwhelming. That if you're not happy all the time, that has its own negative consequences there. That if you feel that's what you have to have and you don't get that, then that's going to be something where you might not be able to cope with some difficult changes in your life or moments in your life and not be able to fight through adversity and persevere. So there's that delicate balance there as well. And I think that was, if you saw my responses to some of your responses to the questions, it's kind of the whole notion that, yeah, being happy is a good thing. I'm not going to deny that, no doubt. But um, trying to chase that on a daily basis and thinking that it's a thing you can have all the time is just not realistic. Um, and I'm not trying to say that like it's a negative thing. Like I would love to be able to have and be happy all the time, but there's plenty of things that, again, either are in or out of your control that can lead you to experience other emotions that, again, it's not going to be just snap of the finger and you can kind of figure out what to do. So there's that as well. Um, but anyways, we'll keep it going. Um, Another source of stress is conflict, being pulled in two or more different directions by opposing forces or motives. That's what that we get into there. Conflict can be frustrating, especially when a person is facing a difficult decision, such as choosing which college to attend. Obviously, some of you have experienced that already, or maybe still are. And the pressure to make the right choices only adds to the stress involved in making such a major decision. A person thinking about going to college or entering the armed services may feel conflicting emotions. You may be excited about the prospects of learning new information and developing new skills in the future, and maybe being in a new spot in your life, in a new place in the country, or even in the world. However, as you well know, and I know firsthand as well, college is expensive, at least going with that particular example. And a person who plans to attend college must think about how to pay for it. And the person may also have mixed feelings about leaving home. That again, there's that potential that you're going to a university or thinking about going to a university that's not just a quick, drive in the car away. That it might be a bit further than that, or it takes longer to get back home. Um, so psychologists, kind of based off of that, have identified four types of conflict. These are the approach conflict, avoidance conflicts, approach avoidance conflict, and multiple approach avoidance conflicts. So say that 10 times fast, at least all of those. So as you can see on the screen, we have the approach conflict, which is the least stressful of the types that we'll get into here. Um, and the reason why this is the least stressful is because the choices that you're making in this conflict are positive. So in this situation, each of the goals is both desirable and within reach. So for example, suppose you were accepted by several colleges. You would then be faced with an approach conflict because you would have to choose which college to attend, where again, that's a pretty positive thing that you have your pick to choose a college that you want. Where again, if you don't have that particular experience, or maybe you've only got accepted to one and it wasn't really one you were banking on to being the one you wanted to go to, then you're going to be dealing with a few more other stressors that you weren't exactly planning for. And an approach conflict is usually resolved by making a decision. But however, after the decision is made, the person may still have persistent self-doubts about whether you made the right decision. I can think about that in my own life, and it's even something that when you kind of look back on experiences like I have in your life, that even what something seemed like a slam dunk and a good idea or a great decision, you may have you might have second, or you might second guess um, your decision years down the line. So again, those are things that even what might seem like a slam dunk, generally, again, the least stressful type of conflict, it doesn't mean that that all just magically goes away or that there's not any kind of negative down the line that you might have to deal with. And again, the decision the decision maker, excuse me, may or may not feel settled until he or she is in the new situation and knows that things are working out. So, for example, kind of building off the college example here, even after you decide which college you will attend, you may still feel uncertain until you settle into your dorm, meet your roommates, and then begin classes. That, okay, it seemed on the surface for what maybe you're looking for in a major, for a career path, that this college has got the best program or one of the best programs for that particular major or job. Um, but again, you might have second guesses, or you might second guess yourself whether or not in the end that that was the right move. And again, it's going to be something where in this case, until you experience and settle in, there might be that uncertainty for a bit. The avoidance conflict is going to be more stressful. People in this type of conflict are forced to choose the lesser of two evils. That's how that's usually described. That is, to choose between two unsatisfactory alternatives. People are motivated to avoid each of these two negative goals because, again, we don't really like negative. I mean, we like to promote positivity as much as we can. So if we're forced to choose between two negatives, we see if there's any alternatives or ways to work around that. But again, that might not always be the case. Um, but again, the problem with trying to avoid each of these two negative goals is that avoiding one requires approaching the other. So, for example, suppose you were faced with the choice of dropping a course in which you were doing poorly and risk receiving a poor grade. However, by dropping a course, you would not have enough credits to graduate. So there's both negatives, at least on that particular front, or both alternatives, excuse me, have negative sides. So it's a lose-lose kind of thing. You almost have to, where it's kind of the phrase you have to bite the bullet and kind of make one of those choices and live with the consequences and hopefully learn um, from that particular consequence or decision, so you're not put in that position again. You have the approach avoidance conflict, which is where a single goal can produce both approach and avoidance motives. This is people face this type of conflict when a choice is both good and bad at the same time. For instance, you might want to attend a college that has an excellent reputation and exactly the program you're looking for, but the college might be very far away and visiting home would be very difficult and costly. That if you feel that, again, being able to go home and visit family, visit maybe some of your friends from back home if they're still around, generally speaking, if that's important to you and valuable to you, that even if everything else is a slam dunk about what you want for your future, if you value those things, that turns that college potentially into a negative, at least like a negative choice. That even if it's a slam dunk for the program, um, all those kind of things. It's one of the most prestigious universities, especially for the program you're looking for. That might not be enough to outweigh what you feel are the negatives. That it's too far away from home. That you can't just get in your car if you got one and drive home in an hour or two and be back home and visit for as long as you want and head back to school just as quickly. That you have to kind of weigh those things out. Where again, for me, I know it's just in my own head and my own experience, I would take that kind of chance myself. But again, I'm not you, and I'm no one else is yourself. So if that applies to you, those are things you have to be thinking about of what you value the most when it comes to even a decision like that. And then the last one is the multiple approach avoidance conflict. And this is the most complex form of conflict. In this kind of conflict, each of the several alternative courses of actions has its advantages and disadvantages. And you face this type of conflict when you have to decide which college courses to take, for example. The factors to consider may include your level of interest in the subject, the reputation of the teacher or the professor in this case, the usefulness of the course to your overall plan, and the difficulty of the course as well. And when you also deal with this, when deciding to figure out where to eat, that seems kind of a low pressure situation. But when you decide to eat at a restaurant, you might have to choose between food that is healthful but not very tasty, or food that to you is very tasty but not very healthful, and food that is both tasty and healthful but then is too expensive in the long run. And what you see in this particular situation, this type of conflict, is dilemma. Um, so, in such a dilemma, you would be faced with multiple approach avoidance conflict. So, when conflicting motives are strong, people may encounter high levels of stress and confusion about what course of actions to choose. But again, it's kind of the whole notion that there's a lot of perspectives and things you have to keep in mind potentially in your life in certain situations. But yeah, um, even those that learn how to cope and work through these kind of moments still feel that kind of pressure and stress that, again, you have a lot of things to potentially answer to that you have to wonder again, in the end, do you make the right decision or did you make the right decision because of all these different things you're having to keep in mind? Um, and then when conflicting motives are strong, I might have said this here, people may encounter high levels of stress and confusion about what course of action to choose. People in the situation then need to make a decision to reduce the stress, yet decision making itself can be quite stressful, especially when there's no clear or right choice. Again, in this day and age that we live in, where there's a lot of instant gratification that you can get and buy and see anything that you could ever possibly want or hear anything that you want pretty much at a click away, um, these moments in life are the ones that really, I think, show the true character and nature of a person. That again, that those that give up, that says something about them. Those that take their time, kind of work things through, stay level-headed and calm, that also shows their character, I think, as well. So again, we like routine. We like things that are generally kind of low-hanging fruit. Um, even those that, again, maybe are good at persevering through things, that still, if you have an option that seems at least the easier of the routes and may still a slam dunk, you're going to take it. Um, but again, there's that whole expression of that there's no shortcuts to success. So um, that's kind of the counter to that. That yeah, there might be even the low hanging fruit and easy thing to choose to get you to where you want to go, but is that really going to be the best choice for you to make, really in the long run? Um, and some people cope with such difficult decisions like that by making a too calm list. Might be a list kind of person, where you jot down all the reasons for and against a particular choice. The thought that goes into making the list sometimes helps people decide what to do in the end. That again, you take the time to reflect, you take the time to think about all the options that are out there, and then again, go through your own value system, go through the things that um, you see as important, and say, okay, which option or options potentially check as many boxes as possible. That again, generally speaking, in this type of conflict, you're not going to be able to check all the boxes on everything that you want. So there's a bit of compromise that you have to make here. And again, it's something that we don't necessarily at times like to compromise. We like to have everything that we want and we want it now. So this is the kind of situation where again, you might have to give up something to get what you want, but hopefully in the long run, the choice that you make is going to be checking enough boxes that makes it the right decision in the long run down the line. The last thing that we'll close out with this particular section are personality types and the impact, at least that that has. Some people actually create their own stress. Psychologists have classified people into two basic personality types, which is type A, which is seen as more of the intense type of personality, and type B, which is more of the laid back. Type A people are always on the go. They put pressure on themselves and thus are constantly under stress. There's kind of always something to do, always something to chase, always something to go for, always something to have to try to reach. I would say, generally speaking, kind of the stereotype would be for us here in the United States, that's what we generally have as a nation. I know there's plenty of people that you can say, oh, that's not the case. And there's a lot of lazy people here. But generally speaking, I would say that the pace of life that we have here in the United States, generally speaking, is a lot more up tempo and fast, and always on to the next thing, and not really any time to reflect. Um, that we're always kind of on the go. There's always that pressure. There's always something ahead of us and behind us that we have to worry about. Whereas in other countries, and some of you may have experienced this if you've gone out of the country, especially in different places in Europe, that are more of the laid back. That the pace of life is a lot slower. There's more breaks. There's still plenty of things, at least for people to do and to achieve at least their full potential. But there's not that kind of constant pressure to have to achieve something all the time as we have here. Um, Also, at least those that are type A are highly driven, competitive, and impatient. Um, I would say that's something that if you've seen The Last Dance, the documentary series, at least about the 97, 98 Bulls and specifically Michael Jordan, that, yeah, you have a guy there that's definitely type A. That very competitive, everything that he does, I would say still even to this day, it's through that particular lens. Obviously, Kobe Bryant, rest in peace. The Mamba mentality, that would be something that would fall into the type A kind of personality as well. Type A people also always feel rushed and pressured because they operate at full speed and become annoyed when there is even the slightest delay. So, again, something that's been mentioned, at least in the Last Dance documentary, is just talking about, again, Michael Jordan, at least in practice with his teammates with the Bulls, are expecting everybody to be at his pace, at his level all the time, and that he got on people, on his teammates when they weren't. What he felt, was his level of expectation in the long run. Um, so you see that play out in sports plenty of times. that there's plenty of people that fall into that type A category that want things now, always on the go. And it's not really until you complete that task, until pretty much you retire, before you're able to kind of sit back and reflect and be more even just, I guess, kind of a type B type of person. Generally speaking, people are going to be kind of more the type A for kind of the duration of their life. Until again, you kind of end that quest or what you're searching for. Type A people never seem to have enough time, especially since they often try to do several things at once. So they are the group that multitasks or tries to. They walk, eat, and talk faster than other people. They generally are quick to become pretty angry. So those are kind of the things that you see with type A that, again, those kind of personality traits, while I think are very valued, and what you want to drive and, achieve the American dream, and you're doing this, you're putting in the work, and it's the work ethic, and I know I preach that a lot. Um, it's something that, again, leads to its own set of stressors as well. Type B people, in contrast to that, are more relaxed. They are more patient. They don't become quick to anger, and they are typically less driven than type A. And while type A people often earn more money than type B do, type A people pay a high price for their success. So again, you see plenty of people, especially kind of on the entertainment side of things, generally speaking, that fall into that type A category. That again, they may in the end have some demons that they have to kind of work themselves through to get to the point of success that they want to attain. And they may not ever work past that. They may achieve the kind of success that we would all want financially and socially, personally, the whole bit. But they still might have demons that they never really work their way through. That they pay that price. Some, as we've seen, unfortunately, kind of take their life um, in the process. Um, they, at least those in type A, must live to the heightened stress they create for themselves. So it's kind of the whole notion that where with type A, you kind of get the expression that, well, you kind of put it on yourself. Like it's on you. If you're feeling stressed out, you put yourself in that spot. Research shows that type A personalities run a much greater health risk than type B do, or type B people do. And if they do not loosen up and relax, but instead continue their type A behavior for prolonged periods, for years on end, they are in greater danger of suffering coronary heart disease. So there's that. So it's kind of there's that trade-off where you can be very very successful with type A in a variety of different ways, but then there's those kind of consequences that may impact your health. That if you're constantly on the go and constantly feeling to have to do something, that might catch up with you. You might not get enough sleep. You might not eat well. You might not exercise as much as you want or should. That you can get all that success, but then there's that trade-off. And then same thing for type B, where you might be more relaxed, patient, the whole bit. But in the grand scheme of things, you might not be as successful as what people strive for, at least depending on what your culture strives for. Again, it's not the notion that you either are one or the other, or that you can't be both, or that you can't be a type A person potentially and find ways to balance all the pressures that you face, and vice versa. Um, but again, that's generally speaking through research, at least on the psychological front, what we see with type A and type B personality type folks. So again, you might fall specifically only into one of these categories. You might be right in the middle. And again, even with these descriptions, it's the notion that not everything is going to be a check mark or check box, and you have to be this way for type A, and you can't possibly be anything else. That's just not true either. That just drives the point again of perspective that I've talked about throughout the year. So that I think is where we're going to leave it for this video. We'll get into the responses and effects of stress in the next video.